Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something that, well, it might seem like a no-brainer, but stick with us.
Yeah,
Because just like, I don't know, perfecting your coffee or tying that knot that never slips, there's actually a real knack to it. We're going deep on blunts for beginners.
exactly. It's definitely more than just, throwing some cannabis in a wrap. It's those little details. They make all the difference between like a frustrating fumble and a really satisfying experience.
Okay.
And we've got the beginner's guide to smoking blunts as our sort of jumping off point today.
And this isn't just some dry instruction manual, is it? The guide actually gets into the nitty-gritty.
It does.
It aims to help you skip those classic oops moments that beginners often face.
Yeah, the pitfalls.
So our mission for you today is really to give you the inside track on confidently preparing and, well, enjoying a blunt. So you can sidestep the harshness and, avoid wasting your good stuff.
Right. Think of this as your shortcut. Getting it right, hopefully the first time, pulling out the key insights from our source.
Okay, let's do it.
So let's get down to it then. For anyone just starting out, maybe we should clarify what exactly is a blunt?
Okay, yeah, good starting point. Essentially, a blunt is ground cannabis rolled up in a tobacco leaf wrapper. Or, increasingly popular now, a hemp-based paper. Kind of like a cigar, but, with a different filling.
And that wrap, it really makes all the difference, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, unlike a joint, right, which uses those really thin rolling papers, a blunt's thicker wrap means it burns much, much slower.
Ah, okay.
Plus, if it's that traditional tobacco leaf, you're also looking at nicotine being involved.
Right.
The source material really emphasizes that thicker wrap, slower burn, and yeah, the potential for nicotine if you go that traditional route.
Which is definitely something to keep in mind. I mean, the CDC has information on how nicotine can affect your body, heart rate dependence, all that. And our guide does touch on that. But the good news is, if you want to avoid nicotine altogether,
There are options.
yeah, there are great alternatives out there now, like those hemp wraps you mentioned.
Absolutely. And to really get the process, it helps to know the basic parts of a blunt.
Okay.
We're really just talking about three main things: the wrap itself, the ground cannabis inside, and then sometimes an optional tip or filter at one end.
Right, so the wrap holds it together, dictates the burn speed. The cannabis is, well, the main event, obviously.
Yeah.
But what about that tip? It seems like a small detail, but it's actually pretty important, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, you can certainly smoke a blunt without one, no problem. But the tip has a couple of key functions.
My dude.
It helps keep things a bit cooler for your fingers as you're, enjoying it. And it also gives the blunt some structure.
Ah, easier to handle.
Makes it easier to hold and handle, exactly. Less likely to get flimsy at the end.
Okay, so we've got the basic anatomy down. Now, the guide makes a really big deal about choosing the right wrap. It's not just about aesthetics, is it? Why is that choice so crucial?
Well, what's fascinating here is how much the wrap dictates the whole experience, like everything.
Why?
Yeah, it'll affect the flavors you taste alongside the cannabis, how evenly and slowly it burns, whether or not you're inhaling nicotine.
And even the legality. You mentioned that earlier.
Even the legality in some places. Yeah, that's not something most beginners would even think about, I imagine.
No, definitely not.
Exactly. Our source points out that regulations around flavored tobacco can vary quite a bit. It references the FDA on that.
Okay.
So depending on where you are, those like tempting grape or mango flavored wraps might not even be available legally.
Wow.
And for people using cannabis for medical reasons who specifically want to steer clear of nicotine, researchers at Harvard Health actually suggest looking into hemp wraps as a good alternative.
That's a really important heads up. So, okay, you're standing there, faced with all these different options. What should be going through your mind? What should you consider?
The guide breaks it down pretty clearly. A few key things. First is the material, right?
Tobacco. Hemp?
Exactly. Are you leaning towards traditional tobacco, a nicotine-free hemp option, or maybe even some of those other botanical fibers you see now?
Okay.
Then freshness. This is paramount. A wrap that's nice and pliable, still got some moisture.
Less likely to crack.
Much less likely to crack when you're trying to roll it. That's super frustrating.
I bet.
Then you've got size. Those mini wraps are pretty good for solo sessions. King sizes are obviously better if you're sharing with friends.
Right.
And of course, flavor. That's a big draw for many people. You've got fruit, sweet flavors, menthol, or just a more natural tobacco or hemp taste.
So lots to think about.
Ultimately, yeah, the goal is to pick a wrap that fits your specific needs. Size, material, flavor, local rules. all for the smoothest, tastiest, and most compliant experience.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
A cracked wrap just sounds like a recipe for, yeah, frustration.
Totally. Speaking of which, the guide then walks us through the actual rolling process. It sounds maybe more achievable than some folks might think.
It really is. Our source breaks it down into 6 key steps, and honestly, each step is pretty straightforward once you understand why you're doing it.
Okay.
And they all work together to ensure you get that nice even burn and a flavorful smoke without it, burning down one side faster than the other.
That dreaded canoeing.
Exactly. Canoeing. Nobody wants that.
Okay, so let's break down these steps for our listeners. First one is grinding. Why is getting the right consistency so important here?
Think of it like Goldilocks, right? You want it just right. A medium grind is the sweet spot.
Not too fine, not too chunky.
Precisely. If it's ground too finely, like dust, it can restrict the airflow, makes it hard to pull smoke through.
Right.
If it's too chunky, you end up with those annoying hot spots that make the smoke harsh and uneven.
The guide suggests aiming for a texture kind of like coarse rock salt. That seems to be the sweet spot for an even burn.
Got it. Rock salt consistency. What's step 2?
Step 2 is all about prepping the wrap itself. So if you're using a cigarillo, like a swisher or something, you'll need to carefully split it open, usually down the seam, and gently empty out the inner tobacco.
Nope.
With a hemp leaf wrap, it's usually just a matter of carefully taking it out of the packaging without tearing it. They can be delicate.
Gentle handling.
Very gentle. And the guide also mentions that adding just a tiny bit of moisture to the wrap at this stage, like barely dampening it, can help prevent it from cracking as you work with it.
Okay. Gentle handling, maybe a hint of moisture. Then we move on to filling and shaping.
Exactly. Step 3. You want to spread your ground cannabis evenly along the inside trough of the wrap.
Evenly is key, I guess.
Super key for an even burn. And leave a little bit of space empty at both ends. Well, it gives you room to seal it up properly without cannabis spilling out, and it prevents the ends from just falling apart once it's lit. Gives it some structure there.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now comes the part that can look a little intimidating. Maybe the tucking and rolling.
Yeah, step 4. This is where the magic, or maybe the frustration for beginners, starts to happen. You want to gently puck the edge of the wrap closest to you over the cannabis, kind of creating a little tube.
Okay.
And then use your thumbs to roll the rest of the wrap upwards and over, shaping the blunt into a cylinder as you go. Getting that initial tuck nice and tight is really key.
Sounds like it takes practice.
It definitely does. And for anyone who learns better by seeing it done, the University of Colorado's Cannabis Research Initiative actually has some helpful visuals online that demonstrate this tuck and roll motion pretty well.
Oh, that's a fantastic resource. We should link to that.
Oh,
okay,
right.
so once it's rolled, how do you actually seal it shut? Step 5.
Step 5, sealing. Usually for traditional tobacco-based wraps, just a little bit of moisture along the inside edge of the wrap that you lick. That'll do the trick. It gets sticky.
Right.
However, the guide points out that hemp wraps sometimes need a little extra help to seal properly. They don't always have that same natural gumminess.
So what do you do?
A quick, gentle press with a warm, lighter flame, not burning it, just warming it along the seam, can really help them bond and stay sealed. Or use a damp sponge instead of licking, if you prefer.
Gotcha. And finally, there's this optional step 6, the bake. What's the purpose of that?
The bake is just a quick pass with your lighter, holding the flame a little distance away all along the seam and maybe the whole blunt.
Why?
It just helps to gently dry the moisture from sealing it and ensure a really tight seal overall. It's a good final touch to prevent it from potentially unraveling while you're trying to enjoy it.
Right, keeps it all together. Now, for those who might be feeling a little fumble-fingered or overwhelmed by the rolling process, our guide does offer a helpful pro tip, doesn't it, about an alternative?
It does indeed. Yeah, if you find the manual rolling just a bit too fiddly, especially at first, a cone loader tool can be a real game changer.
How does that work?
It essentially helps you funnel the ground flour evenly into a pre-rolled cone-shaped wrap. Much less dexterity required.
Ah, it takes the rolling part out of it.
Pretty much. It keeps things much tidier and saves your fingers from getting quite so sticky, too.
Good tip. And besides the cannabis itself and the wraps, what other tools does the guide recommend having on hand for a smoother rolling experience?
Well, a good grinder is pretty essential for getting that consistent grind we talked about. That really helps the burn.
The rock salt texture.
Exactly. A packer tool, sometimes it's just like a thin stick or the end of a pen, helps you gently firm up the cannabis inside without packing it too tightly.
Right.
If you're using cigarillos, a sharp blade or even a dedicated cigar splitter will make opening them much cleaner than just tearing.
Avoids ragged edges.
Yeah. And for those who prefer a plant-based option to saliva for sealing, maybe for sharing or just preference, there are actually hemp glues available now. Little applicators with plant-based adhesive.
Interesting. So, okay, even with all these steps and tips, it sounds like there are still some common mistakes that beginners often make.
Oh, for sure.
Our guide does a good job highlighting these, which is super useful for avoiding them.
Absolutely. Look, everyone makes a few missteps when they're first starting out. It's part of learning.
Totally.
But being aware of these common errors can definitely save you some frustration and, wasted cannabis.
So what are some of the most frequent slip-ups that beginners should really try to avoid?
Okay, number one is probably overpacking. Jamming too much in there too tightly.
Right, you mentioned that.
Yeah. You want the blunt to feel firm, definitely, but not rock solid. The guide uses a great analogy. Imagine gently squeezing a perfectly ripe peach.
Oh.
That's the kind of give you're aiming for. Enough resistance, but not hard. Too tight kills the airflow.
Makes sense. What else
Undergrinding is another common issue. Leaving the cannabis too chunky.
leads to those hot spots?
Exactly. Those larger chunks burn hotter and faster, creating uneven burning and making the smoke harsh. Remember that medium rock salt size is what you're after.
Got it.
And interestingly, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NEDA, also notes that having a uniform particle size can actually help lower the overall combustion temperature.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which can help preserve those flavorful terpenes, the aromatic compounds in the cannabis that give it its taste and smell.
That's a great little science nugget there.
Yeah.
What else should beginners be mindful of? Any other common mistakes?
Stale wraps. They are a surprisingly frequent culprit for a bad experience.
Because they crack.
They lose their pliability, become brittle, and are much more prone to cracking or tearing while you're trying to roll. Super frustrating.
You avoid that.
The guide advises storing your wraps properly. Keep them in a zip seal bag, maybe toss in one of those small humidity packs you get with some products. And if you're using cigarillos, check for any freshness codes or just feel the pack. Does it feel pliable or dry?
Good advice.
Anything else?
Then there's the way you light the blunt. This is a big one for canoeing. Don't just hold the flame to one spot on the tip.
What should you do?
You really want to toast the entire end, what's called the foot of the blunt. Rotate it slowly while holding the flame slightly away, getting it all glowing evenly before you take the first puff.
Kind of like lighting a cigar.
Exactly like lighting a cigar. Get an even cherry going. Cornell's research in agricultural engineering actually shows that even ignition in any combustion process significantly reduces waste and improves efficiency. So light it right.
Makes sense. One last mistake.
And finally, especially when you're new, try not to inhale too hard or too deeply right away. That can make the smoke feel much harsher than it needs to be. Take gentle puffs. All really valuable pointers. Okay, so we've covered the how-to and the what not to do. Now, what about actually enjoying the experience once it's rolled and lit? How can beginners ensure they have a smoother overall session? The guide has a checklist for this too, right?
It does indeed. This smoother session checklist is really all about maximizing enjoyment and comfort, particularly for those who are maybe new to smoking blunts or smoking in general.
Okay, what's on the list?
Well, one suggestion is adding a filter tip, maybe even a charcoal filter, into the end before you roll. That can help cool down the smoke and potentially filter out some of the harsher elements.
Interesting.
Using a hemp wick instead of a butane lighter to actually light your blunt. Some people find this eliminates that initial chemical taste you can get from the lighter fluid.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And something super simple. Sipping water between puffs really helps combat that classic cotton mouth, that dry mouth feeling.
Definitely familiar with that one.
Yeah.
What else makes the list for a smoother time?
For beginners, maybe consider choosing cannabis flower with a slightly lower THC potency to start. Maybe something in the 10 to 15% THC range, rather than jumping straight to the super high potency stuff.
For a gentler introduction.
Exactly, a gentler onboarding. The University of Washington's Alcohol and Drug Agitation page actually has some good resources on how THC potency can affect your individual experience. It's worth checking out.
Good resource.
And of course, this might seem obvious, but it's crucial. Always be aware of and adhere to your local possession limits and consumption laws. Staying legal avoids a whole lot of potential harshness that has nothing to do with the smoke.
Excellent point. So to kind of bring it all together then, it really boils down to just a few fundamental things, doesn't it?
Precisely. It sounds like a lot when we break it down, but the core is start with fresh wraps, take your time to grind and roll evenly, be patient when you're lighting it, get that even burn going,
And take mindful inhales.
and take mindful, gentle inhales, especially at first. Master those basics, and you'll be well on your way to a much more enjoyable and satisfying experience overall.
This has been incredibly insightful. Honestly, much more to it than meets the eye initially.
Right.
So now that we've explored this foundational knowledge of, rolling and enjoying blunts, it really opens up a world of possibilities. So for you, our listener, what aspect of this are you now most curious to explore further? Is it maybe the subtle differences in flavor you might find with all those various wraps we talked about? Or perhaps experimenting with different strains of cannabis and seeing how they interact with the wrap's taste?
Or even the social side.
Or maybe even the social rituals around sharing a blunt with friends.
Yeah.
There's a whole realm of personalized experiences within this seemingly straightforward act.
We encourage you to think about what now piques your interest the most.
Yeah. What's next for you?
Thanks for taking this depth dive with us today.